Our lives are a string of insights, flashes of inspiration that can be the catalyst for new ideas. However, our pace of life these days means we tend to miss some of them completely. I'm Dave Hill, and I'm the host of the Simple Reflections podcast, a fortnightly series of interviews with people from all walks of life. Our conversations are an invitation to reflect on some of the simple insights my guests have had that have gone on to have a profound impact on their lives. So grab a cuppa and a biscuit, join us, slow down for a little while and see what shows up for you. Well, welcome to the next episode of the Simple Reflections podcast. Today I'm joined by Nathaniel Dunn. Nathaniel and I crossed paths a few years ago, having been introduced by Ankush Jain to each other, and he was on his way to do some training for an organisation called Rock to Recovery, which help veterans and their families. And we've kept having conversations over the last few years, and they've been fun. And I thought it would be great to have him on here today and continue those conversations and see where this takes us. So welcome, Nathaniel. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks, Dave. Great to be here.
Yeah, no, it's lovely to see you. I was just wondering if you'd be comfortable sharing a little bit about how you ended up doing what you're doing and what you're doing now before we sort of jump into the meat of it.
Yeah, for sure. How I ended up doing it was a complete accident. I was in the corporate world for many years, 11 years by the end, and used to really struggle with anxiety, social anxiety, which was really weird for me because I always got on well with people. I always connected well with people. I never had a problem with people, always had friends. You know, it wasn't like I struggled with people, but put me in a group, and a group could be as little as 3 people, and I would just start to get anxious. And I'd always been like that. So for me, that was just completely normal. You know, I didn't think of it as a problem. I didn't think of it as a mental health thing. I just thought, I've been told since I was a kid, I'm shy. In my head, I'm shy. And that's that. And just would feel uncomfortable very, very often. But it really started to show itself for me when I was in my 20s, and I went into the corporate world, and all of a sudden I'm working in this big company. I'm working in the head office. I'm working in London, and just the room that I was in every day had 250 people in it. That's massive open plan office. And for me, that was just such an uncomfortable environment. I hated it. And it was exhausting me. You know, I was just on this perpetual anxiety. And my job, ironically, because I was good with people, my job was managing client relationships for this agency that I was working with. So my job was being in clients' offices, being in meetings, running meetings, doing lots of formal stand-up presentations to bigger and bigger audiences. And then I'm becoming a manager, so I'm running my own team. So I'm just in groups constantly. And so this anxiety was just going up and up and up. And then at one point, quite a few years in, probably about 8 years into it, I had a panic attack in a meeting, which I didn't know was a panic attack at the time because I didn't know what was happening to me. And it was very uncomfortable. It was completely shocking, and I couldn't explain it. And it happened in front of a room full of people. And I was deeply, deeply embarrassed and ashamed about that. And at the time, it's one of the worst things that had ever happened. And I was so confused because I didn't even know what it was. Mm-hmm. And it was that experience that prompted me to seek some understanding of myself. I distinctly remember that day so clearly. It's funny, isn't it? Like the really intense experiences in life, like you can remember them almost picture perfect.
Yeah,
I can remember it so well because I was in a client's office, and I remember walking out of that office just desperate to leave the space, just so embarrassed. And in my head, just saying to myself, I never, ever, ever want to have that happen to me again. And that was the thing that prompted me to seek some help, some understanding. And I did that, and I got some help, and it was very quick for me. I went and did some NLP training and with a guy called James Sakalis in Melbourne, and like just the anxiety just dropped within like 2 days. And I'd been anxious. I was 31, I think, at that point, and I'd been anxious the whole time, 30 odd years or 25 years that I could remember. And then all of a sudden I wasn't. And that for me was just a total game changer. It was massive. I can't begin to describe to you in words what that was like. It was just like someone just flicked the switch. And that then prompted me. I was fascinated by that, because I thought, well, why did no one tell me that? Why is it taking me this long to fix this, or to have to find peace? And why are we not teaching kids this stuff if it's that easy? And so it was selfish reasons, really. Initially, I just wanted to not be so fearful all the time. But then the more I got into it, the more fascinated I became with, well, how does this work? Like, how does the mind-body connection work? How do thoughts and feelings work? How do we create emotions? How do we create anxiety and all the other things that keep us stuck? And I just threw myself into learning, and really just for me, initially. And it was probably maybe a year and a half or 2 years after that, I went to an NLP conference in Melbourne, and it was pretty much all NLP, but Jamie was there. Jamie Smart was there. And he'd just written Clarity. So it was that kind of time. Gotcha. And he was the only, and he was sort of like transitioning out of NLP into 3 principles. And I saw him, and I saw him do something completely different to what everyone else was doing. And 2 things happened for me that weekend. One was, it was the first time ever I'd been in a room full of people who were professional people helpers. There were 300 people at this conference, and they were coaches and trainers and therapists. There weren't any doctors or psychologists or anything like that. It was all people who were helping other people professionally, but in this sort of non-clinical, usually non-mainstream kind of thing, these areas. And I didn't know that world existed. And I was all of a sudden, I was in this room, and they're cool people and really interesting work. I was like, oh, wow, this is a thing. And I also realized, because I felt like I was a bit of a baby at that point in the personal development space, but I was lucky that I'd had some really good training. But I'd been told that by my teacher, but I never had any other benchmark. So I never really knew. And it was only when I was in a room full of people and seeing other people doing demonstrations and things like that, and I realized, no, actually, I know enough that I could do something. And that was a real turning point for me, where I went, you know what, I'm going to try coaching for a bit. And that's how it started. So that was a real accident. And that's evolved now over the last few years to the point where now I'm involved in a bunch of different things now. I'm still doing some work with Rock to Recovery, like you mentioned. So that's very much, I think of that more as mental health kind of work, although I don't really like the frame of mental health. But the people who come to that tend to be usually really not in a good way when they come. They've very much got some sort of official diagnosis, a lot of post-traumatic stress, depression, anxiety, lots of trauma. So that I do some work in that space. But then outside of that, my main focus is in the business world. So I'm working with entrepreneurs, and particularly what really lights me up is people who are using their business as a force for positive change in the world. That they're the people who I love working with. So I've got clients in that space. I'm working with some people who are transitioning out of corporate into that space and helping them to make that transition. And I'm running men's groups as well.
Oh, that's cool.
So I'm doing a bunch of different things. I think in my head, it's all the same. It's just different. It's just different contexts and people at different starting points. But the work, as I see it, is the same.
That's cool.
And
absolutely. And isn't it fascinating that you've gone from the thing that you hated the most in the world in terms of being in groups of people to being in groups of people and thriving?
Yeah.
And the transition between those two things is a little bit of understanding that's shifted.
Yeah.
Nothing else has changed. You haven't had there hasn't been an upgrade in your software. It's just been able to see it differently.
Yeah, exactly.
And I find that stuff endlessly fascinating.
Yeah.
Because at the time it looked like something really unpleasant that you didn't want to be in, and actually getting away from that alleviated the pressure, because that's what felt like the right thing to do. And to a degree that helped. Not being in that environment created the space for you. And when you saw that wasn't a thing, when it didn't look like that anymore, it became completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
That's really
it's
cool.
Funny how it can flip.
Yeah.
I mean, if I think back to that point just before the panic attack, or just before I sorted out the anxiety, my biggest fear was public speaking. I hated it. And I was doing it every day almost at work. It was a big part of my job. And so I was doing it all the time. So I was good at it. I had kind of strategies for getting through it and psyching myself up and stuff. But the emotional cost was massive. I would worry about it for weeks and weeks and weeks. If I had a presentation booked in the diary, I'd just be worrying about it constantly. It would always be there in the back of my mind. And then as it got closer to the day and then on the day, and then that would peak into like panic mode sometimes. And then I'd deliver it, and usually it would be great, you know, and it would go well. Can count on one hand the times that it hasn't gone well in many hundreds of stand-up presentations. But afterwards, then I would crash, and I would just be exhausted. I would literally, sometimes I'd be presenting at a client's office in the morning, and I'd go and do the presentation first thing, like 9 o'clock, and I'd be so exhausted that I'd go and hide in the toilets and lock myself in a cubicle and just sleep for an hour, because I was so drained by the emotion of standing up and talking for 20 minutes.
Yeah, just hanging on to it.
It was awful. And now I'm a paid speaker, you know? And I've got a bunch of workshops coming up at some music festivals. I've just done some stuff up at Edinburgh Napier, and I love it, and I look forward to it, and I'm excited by it, and I'm even excited by the nervousness that comes. And that's just like, if you'd asked me 10 years ago if I'd be doing this or if that was even possible, I couldn't see it. Just couldn't see it, because it had so much discomfort, and now it's just completely the opposite.
What would you say is what would you say in your understanding at the moment is the excitement in the nervousness? You know, what is it that you know, what expectation do you have on what's around the corner, what's next? You know, what does that look and feel like for you?
Yeah. Well, for me, the nerves are part of the process. Nerves are good. I look forward to the nerves now. It's like, you know, there's a fine line, isn't there, between nervousness, sort of discomfort, versus that anticipation or like eagerness or excitement. It's almost the same feeling. It potentially is the same feeling. It's just defined differently depending on your perspective. It either means something really good's about to come, or it means something really bad's about to come. But the meaning is completely made up. The feeling's just a feeling. And I think that's the thing that's so different for me now. I used to feel those feelings and immediately create this whole story about what that meant, and that I was going to forget what I was going to say, and that I was going to bomb on stage, or that I was going to get asked questions that I couldn't know the answer to, and people were going to see me as the fraud that I really am. And, you know, that people were going to see how nervous I was, and that they were going to judge me as not having my head together or whatever. That was the story that I had about that feeling. So whenever that feeling came up, all that stuff was going on in my head. Whereas now when that feeling comes up, it's like, I just know it's my system repairing itself. I know it's me getting ready to perform in some way. It's like the physical, you can do the preparation about what to say and how to say it, but there's an energetic preparation as well, like getting yourself, being in the zone, you know, being present, being ready, in the same way that you might have for a musical performance or a fight or any kind of performance. It's part of the process. And the more I've seen that over the years, now it's almost, I welcome it, you know. I'd be worried. I'm worried if it's not there. If it's not there, I'm like, ooh, I'm getting a bit blasé here. Like, you know, I need to. I should be more concerned about this.
That's interesting. You say that. You know, I think for me, you know, in the past when I felt nervous about things, it's come with a sort of element of dread to it because of those concerns that I've got about how it's going to go and what people are thinking, which at the end of the day, actually, I'm making all of that up. And when I saw that that's what was going on, when I realized that when it was me in the audience and someone else was up getting ready to speak, I wasn't thinking about how they were going to do and what they were going to do. I was too interested in chatting to my mates or the people beside me and going, okay, right, I'm into listening to what you've got to say now, but I wasn't really considering how it was going to go and judging that person. That never really crossed my mind. And if they were nervous, I would feel for them actually, rather than go, oh God, I can't believe that this person's up there. They shouldn't be there. I never thought that.
Yeah.
And I just got intrigued by that. Something that's cropped up in the last few days is, just had the Three Principles UK conference, which was done virtually this year. So I didn't see all of it as it was going out live, but I have been able to catch up on some of it, which has been wonderful. And one of the beauties of it this year was sort of just challenging that piece about where, when we are feeling uncomfortable in the build up to something, what is that inviting us to do? And the sort of theme that came out of it, not only in what was said, but what I felt for myself was actually, it's a moment to sort of trust the system and almost surrender to it.
Yeah.
So the nerves are actually saying, just go gently, you're about to do something new. And in that, there's the possibility of you seeing something yourself, the people you're speaking to seeing something, and something that doesn't exist yet being created. And that's just that, that is the excitement that you experience as you're getting ready to do that stuff. And I love it. I love it.
Yeah. And the nerves are a factor in the performance. Like when I first really started to explore this, and this was a little bit before I discovered Three Principles. So I was learning NLP, which and a huge part of NLP is like state control and state management and creating flow states, on demand kind of thing. So it's much more kind of proactive, let's say, than the sort of Three Principles approach. And I had a very big presentation. It was a pitch that was worth hundreds of thousands of dollars for the company. I was in Australia. I'd only been in the country a few months. We were flying to a different city to deliver it. It was my client. I'd only been in the business like 3 or 4 months, but it was my client. My boss was going to be there. My boss's boss was going to be there. And it's like this hour-long pitch. And all the people I'm pitching to are like 20 years older than me. And it's like sales directors and marketing directors. It's a big deal. The sort of thing that would normally just terrify me. But I'd learned these techniques to kind of be calm and be present. And so we got to the office and I went into the toilets and I locked myself in the cubicle and I did my little mental routine and got myself present and got myself calm. And I walked into that meeting room for the first time ever in my life doing something like that without any nerves. And it was so amazing for me. I went, wow, this stuff works. I feel totally calm now. And that I just never felt like that in that sort of environment. I've been in those sort of environments a lot. And I thought, this is amazing. I found the answer. And then I came and started to do the presentation and I recognized that I was talking like a robot and I was really flat like that, and I recognized it. I could witness myself doing it and I'm going, come on, like I'm trying to get some energy into my delivery. And I couldn't. And it was so weird because the actual presentation was one of the worst presentations I've done in terms of the style, in terms of my impact and ability to, what I said was fine because most of it was scripted, but I just didn't say it in the way that I knew that I could. And after, I was so confused by that. And afterwards, I went back to my teacher and I said, well, what's going on? Because I did all the right things and it worked. And I went in there feeling great. And feels like a new experience for me. But the presentation was rubbish. And he said, well, what if your nerves are part of your process? What if your nerves, that feeling, is part of you getting ready to deliver at the highest level that you can? And that, for me at the time, it broke my brain. I'm saying, so what? You're telling me to actually be nervous? Is that what you're saying? And it didn't really make sense. But I started to experiment with it after that because I was still presenting every single week. So it was like a testing ground for this stuff. And I realized, panic is not helpful because you can't think straight. And you trip over your own words, but some level of nervousness is good. It's like a performance enhancer. It has you really focused and it has you really connected. It has you like in like something important's going to happen, so I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
And so I realized actually the nerves are good. I welcome them now. And that again is just such a powerful realization to see that. Stop judging the nerves, you know?
Yeah, no, that's lovely. One of the things that I've struggled with on and off as I've been exploring all of this stuff is the notion that every feeling that we have is perfect for us in that moment.
Yeah.
And that includes the panic element. Panic is perfect for us when we're experiencing it.
Yeah.
It's an invitation to take a step back. I sort of shared an analogy with someone the other day saying, a train that's going, 150 miles an hour from 200 meters away looks like a train that's going quite quickly. But when you're stood with 1 or 2 meters of it, it's all encompassing and it's bloody scary. Yeah. And it should be.
Yeah.
The invitation of that fear is to take a step back from it. And every step you take away from that thing that's rushing past you at 100 miles an hour, 150 miles an hour, is a step closer to clarity, being able to see the bigger picture, being able to see more. And when we're in that sort of panic state, it's just an invitation to step back a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love that perspective. That just accepting of any and all emotions. They're all part of us. Mm-hmm. Especially the ones that we don't like the most.
Yeah.
There's so much growth in that. Mm-hmm. I mean, we've talked about it a bit. I mean, I've had some of the most difficult times in my life in the last few months with the death of my sister. And there were times, certainly in the immediate aftermath of that first couple of months, I felt feelings that I didn't know I had access to. There was a depth of pain and loss and confusion and that I just didn't know existed. And it was completely humbling. It was crippling at points. Couldn't think straight. Just really was just completely overwhelmed by it. I didn't know what half of it was, And actually, the thing that's helped me the most through that period is to be accepting of it and to welcome it and to say, no, this is normal. This is a normal part of the process. And it's weird and confusing because I've just never experienced those feelings to that level of depth before.
Yeah.
And so it's scary and it's uncomfortable just because of the intensity and the magnitude of it. But actually, it's a beautiful thing. It's such a powerful thing. It's an expression of love, actually.
Completely.
It's the other side of the love. And the more I have been gentle with myself around that and seen it like that, now when the moments come, and they've been, even this week, I had a bit of a moment the other day, reading a post and looking at some of her pictures, and I got really upset for a few minutes. But it was okay. It was like, I can be with this now without judging it and without wishing that it goes away and being frustrated with myself for having a bit of a cry in the middle of the daytime. That it wasn't that. It was this beautiful acceptance of all of it. And there's so much freedom in that, and there's so much growth in that.
Yeah.
And I think that's such a powerful thing to see. That realization has changed a lot for me. And it already had done, but the last 6 months, it's really solidified that. And, the more discomfort there is, the more important it is to be gentle and to forgive yourself and to be welcoming of it. Mm-hmm. You don't realize the power of that until you really need it. And then you realize the awesome power of that.
Yeah. No, thank you for sharing that. That's, powerful stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it is. I think it's important in the context of some of the work that I'm doing, and I know you're doing in different contexts with veterans, for example, because often some of the things that they bring are huge for them. Mm-hmm. Major trauma, and they've seen and been on the receiving end and often been the perpetrators of some pretty horrific stuff. And certainly my experiences I've worked with many people now who went into the military to get away from what was going on at home as well. A lot of them had some really, really rough upbringings, everything that you can imagine. And there's a lot of weight to that. And one of the things that is so helpful is for them to reach some level of acceptance of the emotional content of that. It's one of the ways that people find freedom from it. Even if they've had the most horrendous things happen to them, they can still find peace. And a huge part of that is an acceptance. I see very often when people first come to that, and especially men, not exclusively, but especially men, there's so much judgment about their own experience.
Yeah.
But like, I shouldn't feel like this. And it doesn't, I'm not a real man or something like that. And it's like all this guilt and judgment and self-criticism and just lack of acceptance of what's going on, that just creates a whole extra layer of pain and struggle and challenge.
Yeah, like most things that are, we don't have clarity of understanding around, or the ability to see that there might be another way other than how we see it right now, that there is room to grow here and see something differently. When it feels like this is a solid lump of rubbish that I'm going to be wearing around my neck forever, there's a sort of giving up to that, knowing that you're lugging it around because there is no other way. When we're having conversations with people that are in that space, when they get the opportunity to see that that's not written in stone, that it doesn't have to be that way, that their past doesn't define them, nor do their feelings right now, the past is something that has happened and has helped them get to where they are today. Now, it might be messy and unpleasant and, completely degrading in some instances, but it's got them to where they are today. And it's a sort of solid base from which to step off.
Yeah.
But you don't need to keep carrying all that stuff with you. It's, it's like, it would be a little bit like every book you read, you've got to carry on your back. That's not true. And you can keep them if you want, but you don't have to. You can pick them back up again and have another read if you like, and you might find a different story in there the second time round. And creating space for people to be able to explore the possibility that what they believe right now isn't a life sentence. It's just what they believe right now. Not to say that there's anything wrong with what they believe right now, that it just is how they see it right now. When they start to see possibilities of something else, even if they can't see what that is, it becomes expansive. It creates curiosity in them, and it comes with excitement rather than dread. It's that flip of that nervousness you were talking about earlier, of either it being a force for, I'm about to learn something new, this is exciting, or, oh my goodness, I'm going to get found out.
Yeah. It's such a powerful thing. It's so simple. It can feel so out of reach, especially when people have been carrying around these books, these stories for so long. But actually, I've been doing this for years now, but it still never ceases to amaze me. Just that beautiful moment where someone just drops something, or it just clicks, and you see it physically. Usually, you just see the weight drop off them. Their whole physiology changes. It's like they get 5 or 10 years younger in about 3 seconds. Their whole skin color changes and everything. And you just see people go, oh, and they see something different. And it's always amazing to see that in people and to facilitate that in people. But especially when it's something like trauma, something that's really just taken over someone's life, and often for several decades before they actually come to this kind of conversation. and it just drops in a second. And it's such a beautiful thing to witness and just see the amazing power of that. It's life-changing.
It hugely is. It hugely is. And I love knowing that every person that we speak to has that potential in them in any moment, whether they're receiving formal help or not. They have that potential to be there on their own and experience that.
Yeah.
And I think what's such a privilege is being able to be witness to that moment you said, when someone's physiology does change, when their skin color changes, and being able to reflect that back, that moment of insight that's just something new has flipped in someone's mind and they've seen possibility in something else. And we get the opportunity to share that moment with them and go, tell me about what you've just seen, please. Because it's never what we've said.
Yeah.
It's something that individual has seen for themselves, which has come with a completely different mindset, tack, whatever you want to call it. And, I remember the first time I consciously was aware of seeing that happen. And it was a course being run further up the road in Scotland about 6 or 7 years ago. And I gone along. It was an absolutely lovely weekend. But there was one young guy there who, I think 23, 24, who just looked like he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. He looked grey. He was either tense or sort of squashing himself in the way that he held himself. And at one point, I think it was on the second day, all of a sudden it was like someone flicked a light switch, and he sat up straight. He went from grey to pink, and this beautiful smile came across his face, and it stayed with him. That was it. It did not go. It was night and day stuff. And I thought, wow, okay, that's really, really exciting.
Yeah.
And I didn't get a chance to ask him there and then, probably because I was a bit nervous about asking him. It felt a bit personal. But it's just something that stuck with me. And the more I've seen that, the more excited I've got about it, because it does reside in everybody all the time. And we're going to keep having moments like that, where something feels completely solid and immovable, and that this is how it is, and it's rubbish, until it doesn't feel like that.
Yeah, exactly. And it's cross-contextual, isn't it? I mean, I was having epiphanies and insights last night when I was being coached by my coach. And it's the same thing, something that in my mind was rigid suddenly wasn't. And in a second, this whole set of ideas and belief, there's a couple of core beliefs in the middle, but there's a belief system around it. This one idea was like propping up this whole other load of ideas. And the moment it just fell apart, it was like the whole thing just looked completely different. And I was like, oh, wow, I just can now meet this situation with a completely different set of options and perspectives. And it happened in moments, and that was just last night. And that was in a business context. But there's no different to a trauma context, or
the context doesn't matter,
relationship context, or whatever anyone's struggling with, that capacity to see something new and to realize something and to drop something or make a connection or whatever it is, however the insight looks. I mean, that's always there.
Yeah. And the discomfort that we feel around those things, I just point you to the fact that there's more to see here.
Yeah.
Don't turn away from it. There's more to see here. Don't be frightened of it. Just, there is a depth that we haven't quite got to yet. And we might find that we get comfortable with something for a bit. And then all of a sudden we get uncomfortable about it. You go, well, I thought I'd solved that.
Yeah.
There's never anything to solve. There's just things to see at a deeper level. Yeah. And it helps to get comfortable about things at times. And as we can grow out of that. It's almost, it's just popped into my mind. It's like being a toddler going, well, these are my favorite pants. I'm still trying to get into them as a teenager. But they're my favorites. But they're not comfortable, are they? You've outgrown that.
Yeah.
And there, it's good to know that. It served me for a period of time, and it no longer serves me. What's next?
Yes. Yeah. There's a new idea possible. I think when I saw this, that in a way that just really sort of redefined what's possible for me, I guess, was a few years ago. And it was one of the clients through Rock's Recovery. And I'd seen people, I'd had many of my own insights, and I'd seen loads of people having insights. That wasn't a new thing for me. But this person turned up and he was robotic. Like you say, he was grey. He reminded me of, you ever watch Star Trek Next Generation, Data?
No.
Where, just like this, just robotic. It was like an android. No emotion at all, nothing visibly, and just one word answers. And I'm talking to the guy and asking him questions, and I'm just getting yeses and nos. And I remember thinking, this is going to be tricky. Like, he's not giving me much to work with here. And it turned out that, bear in mind, the guy was 40 years old. Turned out the guy had been sexually abused as a kid for 5 years, regularly by someone in his family. And his coping strategy had been to just completely block it away and sort of desensitize himself, put it in a box somewhere and disassociate, basically. So he was completely disassociated, and he just had, there was nothing there in him. There was no spark of life, really. It was quite shocking. And I remember thinking at the time when that came out, that he was the first person that I'd worked with who knowingly had experienced childhood sexual abuse. And I remember thinking, I've not worked with someone like this. I don't know if this is going to work in this context. I remember thinking, well, that's like a really big problem. That's different to someone struggling with business or career change or a relationship thing. Like, this is serious now, And I remember in my mind having that on a different level because of what it was. And I remember probably the third conversation, maybe, we were talking, and he just showed this very faint sort of like micro smile, and I recognized it, and I caught it, and I called him on it. And I remember it was probably about the fourth conversation, and there was just this moment where he just dropped it. And he realized in that moment that he did not need to be this abused child. That was an identity story, and that was actually a protection mechanism for him that had served him well to be able to deal with the massive trauma and all the guilt and the shame and all the stuff that comes with that kind of experience. It was a coping strategy, and it had got him through it. But then he carried that forward. I think the abuse stopped when he was about 13. And he said he carried that forward for another like 2.5 decades. And still, I mean, I had so much respect for the guy. He'd still, had a family and had a successful career and stuff like that. But with this outdated coping strategy, and in this moment, he just dropped it. And it was like he just turned into someone else just before my eyes. It was like this metamorphosis thing. He stopped being this robot and he became human. And that sounds horrible when I say it like that, but it was such he literally changed color. And he flushed and he smiled. And then all of a sudden he's cracking jokes. And it was like, this guy's just a completely different person than who he was a couple of hours ago. And, another conversation after that, he said, I'm done. I've got, I don't need any more help. And that for me was such a profound moment because I realized that even with one of the worst things that anyone can go through, it's still possible to have a realization that completely changes your relationship to that. And that for me was like, wow, if that's possible there, then I don't really now see anything. I don't really see any context for people where it's not possible to have some sort of shift.
Yeah.
And that was huge for me. That was such a powerful realization and a knowing in me that like that's available for anybody.
Yeah. No, that's thank you for sharing that. That it sort of sums up everything that you and I both know is true for people, sums up everything that we're sort of pointing to with these conversations in this podcast. I think that's it's a wonderful place potentially to draw stumps for the day. Thank you so much for your time, Nathaniel. It's been lovely to share a conversation with you that we can share with other people rather than just one that we've kept for ourselves selfishly. I wondered if there's anything that you wanted to share with the listeners about what it is that you're up to, what you've got coming up that we can we can publicize for you.
Yeah, thank you. I'd love to. Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate
It's an absolute pleasure.
This platform, and it's great to be talking about this. And if one person listens to this and says, "Oh wow, maybe there's a possibility for something to be different for me," then for me this is a great investment of time. So really happy to be here.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of things that I'm working on at the moment. One is a virtual men's group called Make It Happen. I'm putting together a small group of guys for a period of months, and it's for men who are doing well, who are ticking most of the boxes, but feeling like something's missing. And I've heard that from many, many guys that I've talked to, where they're doing all the right things and they're playing the game according to what they think the rules are, and they're doing well at work and at home. And it's like, yeah, I'm successful by society standards, but I'm not necessarily feeling that. Mm-hmm. And so I've got a program around that I'm enrolling for at the moment. If you're interested to hear more about that, just have a look on my website. And the other thing that I'm doing that I'm really excited about, which is a new project for me, is I've got a retreat in September in the woods in a beautiful location in Wiltshire with in this amazing treehouse that we built over 3 years. It was this huge project to build this space in the woods. And it's the first retreat that we're doing there, and it's called the Back to Basics experience. And we're going to be exploring some of this kind of stuff. I do see the work that we're doing here and teaching people how their minds work. I do see that as like getting back to basics, mm-hmm. getting out of the modern crazy thinking patterns and overthinking, and just getting back to a simpler way of relating with your own mind. So we're going to be exploring that kind of thing in an experiential way, but we're also going to be doing some movement practice. We're going to be exploring breath work. We're going to be exploring cold immersion, fasting, different mediums that are probably more body work, mm-hmm. to help people just to slow down and get away from crazy modern living, turn the phone off for a few days, and just reconnect to you and your body and your mind and how that actually works. So I'm really looking forward to that. That's a new project for us. So cool. Really excited about that.
Exciting.
Again, if you want to hear about that, give me a shout.
No worries. Well, I'll pop links to your website and your email address and stuff in the blurb to this. Thank you so much, Nathaniel. It's been lovely to see you. And looking forward to catching up again at some point soon.
Likewise.
Take care.
Thanks, David.
Thank you for joining us today. If you've enjoyed the conversation, feel free to subscribe and join me and my new guest next time. If you're interested in the work I'm doing, or you think I can be of service to you or your organisation, please email dave@simplicityofmind.co.uk. Remember, see if you can find time to slow down and reflect. Those simple ideas might be worth listening to. Take care, and I hope you can join me in a couple of weeks.